Our next guest is a big-time investor in the final frontier. Yes, we're talking space now. It might sound a little out there, but both Morgan Stanley and Goldman say it's going to be a multi-trillion-dollar market in the next 20 years. It's already paying back billions. Come in, Dylan Taylor. He's co-founder of Space Angels. So the average investor, Dylan, I want to know how they can make money from space here.
I think the easiest monetization right now is with the data and analytics piece. If you look at all the hardware that's in orbit right now and its ability to measure what's happening on the Earth and create products and services around that, that's really the...
So using what's out there already.
That's right.
That's one way of doing it.
Exactly.
But what about aspects of what's going on in space? That is to say, there's a lot of stuff, for example, I hear satellites are falling in their orbit, need to be pushed back a little. Other satellites need to be doing repairs. Is that kind of work being done now?
I see that as a big theme in 2020 and beyond. We've spent the last few years really getting mass to orbit, building launch capability and such, and now it's really how do you manipulate those things now that they're in orbit. Refueling is one, of course, re-inclinating to a higher orbit, in some cases deorbiting, and of course protection. I mean, the whole Space Force is about protecting assets in space.
I may be simplified, but it's kind of like putting gas stations in space, right? In orbit. Gas stations to refuel, to stop the orbit or the descent, etc. There's also a great interest on the part of some in terms of mineral research, mining on places. Obviously, the moon is the most obvious place, but also asteroids and stuff. That's pretty far out in the future, right?
It is pretty far out in the future, and if you look at how you capitalize something like that, it really is nation-state level. It's really hard for a private investor to capitalize something like that, but it leads not only to having resources on the moon that you can manipulate, but also things like space manufacturing and other things that could be really interesting in the future.
Now, on the other hand, while for the individual investor that might be out in the future, I'm looking at China and what they're doing in the dark side of the moon right now and thinking that they're a country that is used to going into a place, taking their resources and running with it. Do you think that's what they might be up to right now?
I think they're looking at settlement on the moon, as we are ultimately. I think we've said when we go back in 2024, we're going to stay. I think China's thinking of it the same way. And obviously, if you're going to go back to stay, you need resources there. You can't bring everything with you. And so if you look at pioneers in any phase of humanity, they're always bringing things with them at the minimum scale and then living off the land, so to speak.
Now, what are you investing in? What is Space Angels investing in specifically?
Across the board, I mean, this on-orbit, as we say, servicing is really important. Space manufacturing, I think, is really interesting. And then, of course, this data and analytics piece, because it's a very capitally efficient model. You can create products and services with just a minimal amount of capital.
When you look at people like Elon Musk and the other multi-billion-dollar investors who have the money to put satellites up themselves, do you look at that as something totally out of the market for an individual investor? Is that something that just billionaires will do with their own money?
Well, there's certainly that model. I would call it benefactor capital, if you will, Jeff Bezos being the most famous example. But I think often the most likely cases will have some consolidation amongst these new space companies. We'll have some holding companies form. And I think ultimately the right model for those companies is to be publicly traded. So I think retail investors should have a choice for a publicly traded space company in the next, I would say, 24 months or less.
Dylan Taylor, Space Angels. Good to see you, Dylan. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, hard sell